Trust is a delicate thread, woven through years of friendship and love. For David Chen, that thread held his world together, until the night a storm rolled in, bringing with it truths that couldn't be unseen. They say betrayal comes from those closest to us, but no one tells you how to handle it when your girlfriend and best friend become the architects of your undoing. Some storms change more than just the weather. David Chen stared at his phone for the 100th time that evening, his thumb hovering over Sarah's contact. They'd been dating for 2 years, and lately, something felt off. The usual good morning texts had become sporadic, their evening calls shorter. She was always busy with work or meeting friends, but her social media stayed suspiciously quiet. Marcus, his best friend since college, had been oddly distant too. They used to hang out 3 or 4 times a week, shooting hoops or grabbing beers after work. Now, Marcus always had an excuse. Sorry bro, got a deadline, or rain check, family stuff. David couldn't remember the last time they'd really talked. Working as a software developer at a startup meant long hours for David, but he always made time for the people he cared about. He and Sarah had met at a tech conference 2 years ago. She was brilliant, funny, and shared his passion for coding. Their relationship had blossomed quickly, and within 6 months, they were talking about moving in together. Marcus had been there from the start, cheering them on. He'd helped David pick out the perfect first date restaurant, listened to him gush about Sarah for hours, and even helped plan their 1-year anniversary surprise. The 3 of them had become inseparable, spending weekends together, hosting game nights, and planning beach trips. That's why the current situation felt so wrong. David couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something obvious. The signs were subtle at first. Sarah's perfume smelling slightly different when she came home late. Her phone always face down on the table, the way she'd step out of the room to take calls. "You're being paranoid," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his dark hair. The startup was in its crucial growth phase, and stress was making him see problems where there weren't any. Still, he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut. Last week, he'd stopped by Sarah's office to surprise her with lunch, only to find her desk empty. Her coworkers seemed uncomfortable when he asked about her whereabouts, one of them mumbling something about a client meeting before hurrying away. That same day, he'd spotted Marcus's car in a restaurant parking lot across town, nowhere near his workplace or usual haunts. David had almost stopped to say hello, but decided against it. Now, he wished he had. The breaking point came during their regular Friday dinner at Sarah's apartment. She was distracted, checking her phone constantly. When David asked if everything was okay, she'd snapped at him, something she'd never done before. "I'm fine. Can't I check my phone without being interrogated?" The outburst hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken tensions. David had apologized, but the evening never recovered. As he was leaving, he noticed a familiar jacket draped over a chair in the corner, Marcus's favorite leather jacket, the one he'd bought during their post-graduation trip to Italy. "Oh, that?" Sarah had said too quickly. "He dropped it off earlier, said he needed me to fix a tear in the sleeve. You know I'm good with that sort of thing." It was true, Sarah was handy with repairs, but something about her explanation felt rehearsed, practiced. And why hadn't Marcus asked him to pass it along? They worked in the same building after all. David spent the weekend analyzing every interaction, every text message, every casual encounter from the past few months. The more he thought about it, the more patterns emerged. Sarah and Marcus's social media comments to each other had increased, while their interactions with him had decreased. They had both started going to the same gym, despite Marcus being a devoted member of a different fitness center for years. On Sunday evening, David received a text from Sarah. "Can't make it to dinner tomorrow. Big project deadline. Rain check." 20 minutes later, Marcus sent a message. "Hey bro, gotta cancel our basketball game. Something came up." David stared at the 2 messages side by side on his phone screen. The same apologetic tone, the same vague excuses. His hands trembled slightly as he opened his laptop and pulled up his credit card statement. Sarah had given him her card details months ago for emergencies, and they occasionally used each other's cards for convenience. There it was, a charge from La Petite Maison, an intimate French restaurant on the other side of town. The date matched one of Sarah's working late nights. The amount suggested dinner for 2. David had never been there with her. He thought about confronting them immediately, but held back. If he was wrong, he'd destroy two of the most important relationships in his life. If he was right, well, he needed to be sure, absolutely sure. The next few days became an exercise in self-control. David maintained his routine, replied to texts normally, and went about his work as if nothing was wrong. But he started paying attention to details he had previously ignored. Sarah's schedule became more transparent when viewed through this new lens. Her yoga classes aligned perfectly with Marcus's sudden interest in evening runs. They both turned off their location sharing on social media around the same time, claiming it drained their phone batteries. David found himself checking their social media obsessively, looking for clues he might have missed. He noticed they'd both started using the same new coffee shop, one that was nowhere near either of their usual routes. Their photos, while never together, often shared similar backgrounds or were posted within minutes of each other. At work, David struggled to focus. His code was riddled with errors, and his team lead had noticed his distraction. "Everything okay, Chen?" she'd asked during their weekly one-on-one. "You seem somewhere else lately." He'd brushed it off with a smile and a vague comment about sleep problems. In reality, he was barely sleeping at all. Every night, he lay awake, replaying years of memories, looking for signs he might have missed. Had there been something between them all along? Had he been blind? Or were they just as surprised by their feelings for each other as he was by his suspicions? The following weekend, Sarah suggested they all meet for brunch, the three of them, just like old times. David agreed immediately, curious to see how they would act together. The restaurant was crowded, but he arrived early and chose a table with a clear view of the entrance. Marcus arrived first, looking slightly nervous. He ordered a coffee and checked his phone repeatedly. When Sarah walked in, David watched their eyes meet across the room. It was brief, barely a second, but he saw it. The slight softening of their expressions, the quick look away, the careful maintenance of distance as Sarah approached the table. Throughout brunch, David observed their unconscious choreography. They never looked at each other for too long, never sat too close, never showed any obvious signs of intimacy. But there were tells. The way they anticipated each other's thoughts, finishing sentences or reaching for the salt at the same time. The inside jokes that seemed too polished, too practiced. When Sarah excused herself to take a phone call, David noticed Marcus's eyes following her to the door. It wasn't the casual glance of a friend. It was the gaze of someone trying not to look too interested, too invested. "How's work?" David asked Marcus, keeping his voice casual. "Busy," Marcus replied, stirring his coffee. "You know how it is. Projects piling up." "Yeah, Sarah's been busy too. Lot of late nights." Marcus's spoon clinked against the cup, a slightly sharper sound than necessary. "That's consulting for you. Never ends?" David nodded, watching his friend's face carefully. Marcus had always been a terrible liar. His tell was a slight twitch in his left eye when he wasn't being truthful. The twitch was there now, barely noticeable, but present. Sarah returned, and the conversation shifted to safer topics: mutual friends, upcoming movies, plans for the summer. David participated automatically, his mind racing ahead to what he should do next. He had his suspicions, but he needed proof, something concrete that would either confirm his fears or put them to rest forever. That evening, after saying goodbye to both of them, David sat in his car for a long time. He thought about the past 2 years, about friendship and trust, about the fine line between suspicion and paranoia. He thought about all the times Marcus had been there for him, all the moments he'd shared with Sarah, all the dreams they'd built together. His phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "Had a great time today. Miss you already." Another buzz? Marcus. "Good hanging out, bro. We should do this more often." David stared at the messages, feeling a strange calm settle over him. He had a decision to make: confront them with his suspicions, gather more evidence, or trust that he was wrong about everything. Each choice would change their lives forever, and there would be no going back. He started his car, his mind made up. If there was something going on, he would find out. And if he was wrong, he'd have to live with the knowledge that he doubted the two people he trusted most in the world. Either way, things would never be quite the same again. As he drove home through the darkening city streets, David thought about what his mother always told him. The truth has a way of rising to the surface, like oil in water. He just hadn't expected the truth to feel this heavy, this suffocating, this real. The next week passed in a blur of calculated moves and careful observations. David started keeping a journal, documenting coincidences and patterns that were becoming harder to ignore. He noted when Sarah's meetings coincided with Marcus's gym sessions, when they both happened to be out of town on the same weekends, how their social media activity seemed synchronized in a way that was too perfect to be accidental. He found himself doing things he never thought he would, checking Sarah's call logs when she left her phone unattended, driving by Marcus's apartment at odd hours, even creating a spreadsheet to track their movements and excuses. The person he was becoming scared him sometimes, but he couldn't stop. The need to know the truth had become an obsession. One evening, while helping Sarah clean her apartment, he found a receipt tucked behind her bookshelf. Dinner for two at a small Italian place, dated 3 weeks ago. The same night Marcus had claimed to be at a family dinner. The same night Sarah had said she was working late. The evidence was mounting, but something held David back from confrontation. Maybe it was fear of being wrong, of destroying relationships based on circumstantial evidence. Or maybe it was fear of being right, of having to face a betrayal so profound it would reshape his entire world. He began to notice other changes too. Sarah's tastes had shifted subtly. She was listening to jazz now, Marcus's favorite genre. Marcus had started drinking green tea instead of coffee, something Sarah had been trying to convince them both to do for months. They were borrowing pieces of each other's lives, unconsciously merging their personalities in a way that made David's stomach turn. At work, his performance continued to suffer. He made careless mistakes, missed deadlines, zoned out during important meetings. His team lead called him in for another chat, more serious this time. "David, I'm concerned," she said, her face etched with worry. "This isn't like you. Whatever's going on in your personal life, maybe you should take some time off to sort it out." He nodded, grateful for the suggestion. A few days away might help clear his head, give him perspective. But as he was leaving her office, his phone buzzed with a notification. Sarah had just checked in at a cafe across town, the same cafe where Marcus had posted a photo just minutes earlier. The coincidences were becoming too numerous to ignore, the pattern too clear to dismiss. Yet David found himself hoping for an innocent explanation, some logical reason that would make sense of everything without shattering his world. That night, he lay awake in bed, scrolling through old photos on his phone, pictures of the three of them together, at parties, on vacation, celebrating birthdays and holidays. He studied their expressions in each image, looking for signs he might have missed, moments where their eyes met for too long, or their smiles held secret meanings. The photos told a story, but was it the story he feared, or was he seeing what he wanted to see? The human mind had a way of finding patterns in chaos, of creating narratives to explain the unexplainable. Was that what he was doing? As dawn approached, David made a decision. He would give them one more chance, one final opportunity to come clean or prove his suspicions wrong. He began formulating a plan, something that would force the truth into the open without direct confrontation. He sent a group text suggesting a weekend trip to the beach house they used to visit together. It was off-season, quiet, isolated, the perfect place for truths to surface. Both Sarah and Marcus replied quickly, perhaps too quickly, with enthusiastic agreement. As David packed his bag for the weekend, he realized he was preparing for more than just a beach trip. He was preparing for the end of something, either the end of his suspicions or the end of his relationship with two of the most important people in his life. The beach house waited, a silent witness to whatever would unfold. David checked his phone one last time before heading out. 2 new messages. Sarah: "Can't wait for this weekend, just like old times." Marcus: "Beach house tradition lives on. See you there, bro." David put his phone away and started his car. The weekend would bring answers, one way or another. The truth would finally rise to the surface, like oil in water. He just hoped he was ready for whatever that truth might be. The drive to the beach house was tense, even though they had taken separate cars due to different schedules. David arrived first, unlocking the familiar wooden door and breathing in the salty air that held so many memories. He'd chosen the smallest bedroom upstairs, leaving the master bedroom, the one they usually fought over playfully, as a test of sorts. Sarah arrived next, her silver Prius pulling into the driveway just as David finished unpacking. She seemed nervous, fiddling with her necklace, a habit she'd developed recently. "The master bedroom still has the best view," she said, wheeling her suitcase inside. David watched her closely, noting how her eyes darted around the house, as if looking for something, or someone. Marcus showed up an hour later, claiming traffic had held him up. David had checked the traffic reports. The roads were clear. As Marcus carried his bags inside, David noticed he was wearing a new cologne, something subtle but distinctly different from his usual scent. The same unfamiliar fragrance he'd caught traces of on Sarah's clothes lately. They ordered pizza for dinner, sitting around the weathered dining table that had hosted countless meals and game nights. The conversation felt forced, like actors performing a familiar play but missing their cues. Sarah laughed too loudly at Marcus's jokes. Marcus kept checking his phone under the table. David watched them both, feeling like a stranger in a scene he'd lived 100 times before. "Remember last summer?" Sarah asked, reaching for another slice. "When we tried to have a bonfire and nearly set the deck on fire?" Marcus chuckled, but his eyes never quite met hers. Yeah, David was convinced he could be a professional fire starter. "Good times," David said softly, studying their faces. Everything seemed simpler then. A heavy silence fell over the table. Sarah cleared her throat and stood up abruptly. "I think I'll take a walk on the beach, clear my head after the drive." "I'll clean up here," Marcus offered, gathering plates. David noticed how they didn't look at each other as Sarah left, how Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he stacked the pizza boxes. It was the careful distance of people trying too hard not to seem close. "I'll join you later," David called out to Sarah's retreating figure. She waved without turning around. In the kitchen, Marcus was unusually quiet as he washed dishes. David leaned against the counter, watching his best friend's tense shoulders. "You've been distant lately," he said carefully. "Everything okay?" Marcus froze for a split second before continuing to scrub a plate that was already clean. "Just busy with work, you know how it is." "Yeah, Sarah's been busy too." David kept his voice neutral, observing how Marcus's left eye twitched at the mention of her name. "She works hard," Marcus said, too quickly. "Always has." "Funny how you both seem busy on the same days." The plate slipped from Marcus's hands, clattering in the sink but not breaking. He laughed nervously, running wet hands through his hair. "Coincidence, I guess. Big city, busy lives." "Right," David said, pushing off from the counter. "I think I'll take that walk now." The beach was empty except for Sarah's distant figure, illuminated by the rising moon. She was standing at the water's edge, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the darkness. David watched from the deck as Marcus emerged from the house a few minutes later, hesitating before heading in the opposite direction. David pulled out his phone and opened his notes app where he'd been documenting everything: the dinner's forced normalcy, the nervous glances, the careful choreography of their movements. It all fit the pattern. But he needed more than patterns now. He needed truth. He decided to take a different path down to the beach, one that would circle around and approach from the other direction. As he walked, he thought about all the scenarios he'd played out in his head, all the ways this weekend could end. None of them were happy endings. The night air was cool and heavy with the promise of rain, perfect weather for secrets to come undone, for truths to finally break the surface. David checked his phone. No messages from either of them. But then again, he suspected they had other ways of communicating now. Thunder rumbled in the distance as David made his way along the shoreline, each step bringing him closer to a confrontation he both dreaded and needed. The wind picked up, carrying with it fragments of conversation from somewhere ahead. He slowed his pace, straining to hear over the sound of waves. Two figures were becoming visible through the gathering darkness, standing close together near a cluster of rocks. David's heart began to race as he recognized their silhouettes, shapes he knew as well as his own reflection. He moved closer, staying in the shadows of the dunes, knowing that this moment would change everything. The storm was getting closer, but the truth was even closer now. David took out his phone, opened the camera app, and waited. Sometimes, he thought, the hardest part of discovering the truth isn't finding it. It's deciding what to do once you have it. Rain began to fall, gentle at first, then harder. But David remained motionless, watching, waiting. The truth was about to rise to the surface, and this time there would be no looking away. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating Sarah and Marcus in stark relief. They were standing closer now, their bodies angled toward each other in that unmistakable way of people sharing secrets. David's finger hovered over the camera button, his hand steady despite the storm. "We can't keep doing this," Sarah's voice carried on the wind, barely audible above the waves. "It's killing me." "I know," Marcus replied, running his hands through his rain-soaked hair. "But how do we tell him? He's my best friend, Sarah. We're destroying him." "He suspects something. I can see it in his eyes." David moved closer, his shoes sinking into the wet sand. Another flash of lightning, another glimpse of their faces, tortured, guilty, yet drawn to each other like magnets fighting their own pull. "Maybe we should just leave," Marcus suggested, his voice breaking. "Pack up tonight, drive away, send him a letter explaining everything." "That's cowardly," Sarah snapped, but she didn't step away when Marcus reached for her hand. "He deserves better than that." David's phone was recording now, capturing every word, every gesture. The rain ran down his face, or maybe they were tears. He couldn't tell anymore. The two people he trusted most in the world were writing the ending to their shared story, and he was just an audience member now. "I never meant for this to happen," Marcus was saying, his words nearly lost in a crack of thunder. "You were his girlfriend, and I was his best friend. It was perfect, simple." "Nothing's simple anymore," Sarah whispered. David watched as Marcus pulled Sarah closer, their foreheads touching. He could stop this now, step out of the shadows, confront them with their betrayal. His legs wouldn't move, his voice wouldn't work. He was frozen in place, a witness to his own unraveling. "We should head back," Sarah said, but she made no move to leave. "David will wonder where we are." "David always wonders these days," Marcus replied bitterly. "Maybe that's our punishment, knowing we're hurting him, but being too weak to stop." The rain was coming down in sheets now, but neither of them seemed to notice. David's phone screen was wet, the recording still running. He had his proof now, more than enough to confront them, to end this charade. Yet he remained hidden, watching as the scene continued to unfold. Sarah's hands were on Marcus's face now, her thumbs tracing his jaw. "Remember when we first realized, that night at the coffee shop?" "You were wearing that blue dress," Marcus said softly. "The one David bought you for your birthday. I knew right then I was going to hell." "We're already there." Their faces drew closer, and David's finger finally pressed the stop button on the recording. He'd seen enough, more than enough. The thunder growled overhead, nature's judgment on this betrayal playing out on a lonely beach. He began to back away slowly, his mind racing with possibilities. He could send them the video right now, watch their phones light up with evidence of their betrayal. He could wait until morning, confront them over breakfast, watch them try to deny what he'd witnessed. He could simply leave, disappear into the storm, let them live with the weight of what they'd done. The beach house lights glowed in the distance, a beacon of what used to be home, what used to be safe. David looked down at his phone, at the video that would change everything. 2 minutes and 17 seconds of proof that nothing would ever be the same. Inside his pocket, his phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Where are you? Getting worried." Then another from Marcus. "Storm's getting bad, bro. You okay?" Their concern felt like acid on his skin. He looked back toward the rocks, but Sarah and Marcus were gone, swallowed by the darkness and rain. Somewhere between the house and where he stood, the three of their lives were unraveling like threads in an old sweater. Pull one, and the whole thing comes apart. David began walking, but not toward the house. He headed further down the beach, each step taking him away from the life he thought he had, from the people he thought he knew. The storm raged around him, matching the tempest in his heart. His phone kept buzzing. More messages, more lies, more pretense of caring. The video felt heavy in his digital pocket, a weapon he wasn't sure he was ready to use. The truth had risen to the surface, just as his mother had promised it would. But now that it was here, he realized that some truths are like hurricanes. They don't just reveal what's hidden, they destroy everything in their path. The question wasn't whether to confront them anymore. The question was how to do it in a way that would leave him with something of himself when it was all over. Because right now, standing alone in the rain with proof of their betrayal, David wasn't sure there would be anything left to salvage from the wreckage of their lies. Lightning split the sky again, and in its brief illumination, David made his decision. He turned back toward the beach house, his steps heavy but purposeful. The storm was about to get much worse, but at least now he was ready for it. Sometimes, he thought, the most devastating storms are the ones we bring with us. The beach house lights grew brighter as David approached, each step deliberate despite the raging storm. Through the windows, he could see Sarah and Marcus in the living room, their worried expressions visible as they peered out into the darkness. They were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, always careful, always maintaining that artificial distance. His clothes were soaked through, but he barely noticed. The video on his phone felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket. As he reached for the door handle, he saw them spring apart slightly, another tiny betrayal in an ocean of deceptions. "David, we were getting worried." Sarah rushed toward him, stopping just short of embracing him. Her hair was still damp from the rain, her makeup slightly smudged. "You shouldn't be out in this weather." "Yeah, man," Marcus added from the couch, his voice carefully casual. "The forecast says it's going to get worse." David stood in the doorway, water pooling at his feet on the hardwood floor. "Interesting weather we're having," he said quietly. "Really brings things to the surface." Sarah's hand, which had been reaching for a towel, faltered slightly. Marcus's left eye twitched. "You should change into dry clothes," Sarah suggested, her voice higher than usual. "I'll make some hot chocolate. Remember how we always used to have hot chocolate during storms?" "I remember a lot of things," David replied, pulling out his phone. "Like how you both used to be better liars." The room went silent except for the sound of rain hammering against the windows. Marcus stood up slowly, his face draining of color. "What are you talking about, bro?" "Don't!" David's voice was sharp enough to make them both flinch. "Don't call me that. Don't pretend. Just don't." Sarah took a step toward him, her hands trembling. "David, whatever you think, whatever I think." He laughed, a hollow sound that seemed to echo in the tense room. "No, Sarah. This isn't about what I think. This is about what I know. This is about what I saw." He held up his phone, his thumb hovering over the play button. "Want to watch a movie? It's a short one. Just 2 minutes and 17 seconds. Stars both of you, actually. Great performances, very convincing emotions." Marcus sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. Sarah stood frozen, her face a mask of horror. "How long?" David asked, his voice eerily calm. "How long have you been rehearsing this play behind my back?" Neither of them spoke. Outside, thunder crashed, as if demanding an answer. 3 months, Sarah finally whispered, tears starting to roll down her cheeks. "It's been 3 months." 3 months, David repeated, tasting the words. 3 months of lies, 3 months of sneaking around, 3 months of looking me in the eye and pretending everything was fine. "We never meant," Marcus started. "To hurt me?" David cut him off. "Funny how people always say that after they've done exactly that. Did you practice that line too? Did you rehearse this moment?" He started pacing the room, his wet shoes leaving tracks on the floor. "You know what the worst part is? It's not the betrayal. It's not even the lies. It's that you both thought I was too stupid to notice, that you could just keep playing this game indefinitely." Sarah moved toward him, reaching out. "David, please!" "Don't." He stepped back, holding up his phone like a shield. "Just don't. I have questions, and for once, you're both going to tell me the truth. No more lies, no more excuses, no more protecting my feelings while stabbing me in the back." The storm outside intensified, matching the atmosphere in the room. Lightning flashed again, illuminating 3 faces caught in a triangle of pain and betrayal. The truth had finally surfaced, but instead of bringing clarity, it only seemed to make everything darker. David's finger still hovered over the play button, the video waiting to be shared, but now, looking at their guilty faces, he wondered if watching it together would change anything. The damage was done. The only question left was how much more destruction they would cause before this night was over. "Sit down," he commanded, gesturing to the couch. "Both of you, it's time we had an honest conversation about loyalty, friendship, and what happens when you destroy both." They sat, not quite touching, but close enough that their guilt created a shared gravity between them. David remained standing, his wet clothes a reminder of the storm where he'd witnessed their betrayal. Sometimes, he thought, the most painful conversations are the ones we've rehearsed 1,000 times in our heads, but never quite prepared for in reality. Lightning flashed through the windows, casting harsh shadows across their faces as David towered over them. Sarah was gripping the edge of the couch cushion, her knuckles white. Marcus stared at the floor, unable to meet his former best friend's gaze. "The coffee shop," David said quietly. That's where it started, right? The one near Sarah's new yoga studio. The one you suddenly started posting about, Marcus, even though you've hated chain coffee shops for years. Sarah's sharp intake of breath confirmed his suspicion. I was helping her with coding problems, Marcus mumbled. It started innocent. Nothing about betrayal is innocent, David snapped. Keep going. I want to hear every detail, every lie, every moment you both looked me in the eye and chose to deceive me. Thunder rolled overhead as Sarah wiped tears from her face. I was stuck on a project at work. Marcus offered to help because you were so busy with the startup. I was busy providing for our future, David's voice cracked slightly. The future you were busy destroying. It wasn't planned, Marcus interjected, finally looking up. We just connected. The conversations got longer. The coding sessions turned into dinner. One night it was raining, like tonight, and... Stop. David held up his hand. I don't need those details. What I need to know is why. Why didn't you just tell me? Why the elaborate lies, the fake schedules, the careful social media posts? Sarah stood up suddenly, her guilt seemingly transformed into defensive anger. Because we knew it would destroy you. Because you didn't deserve to be hurt. Because you were cowards, David finished for her. Both of you. You chose the easy path, the selfish path. He pulled out his phone again, the video still waiting to be played. Should I show this to your families? Our friends? Post it online? Let everyone see the real you? Marcus shot to his feet. David, don't. Please. We'll do anything. Anything? David laughed bitterly. Can you go back in time? Can you undo the nights I lay awake wondering if I was crazy? Can you erase the memory of watching my girlfriend and best friend betray me on a beach in the middle of a storm? The rain intensified, drumming against the windows like an angry mob demanding justice. Sarah had begun to sob quietly, while Marcus looked like he might be sick. 2 years of my life, David continued, his voice growing colder. 2 years of building a relationship, planning a future, and you... He turned to Marcus. 15 years of friendship, elementary school, college, your sister's wedding. I was there for everything, and this is how you repay loyalty? I hate myself for it, Marcus whispered. Every day, every moment, I hate what I've done to you. Not enough to stop though, right? David's words cut through the room like ice. Not enough to choose friendship over desire. Not enough to be a man and tell me the truth. He walked to the window, watching the storm rage outside. His reflection was overlaid on the glass, a ghost of the person he used to be before this night. Behind him, he could see Sarah and Marcus in the reflection too, their guilty faces illuminated by another flash of lightning. You know what's interesting about betrayal? David asked, still staring out the window. It's the only crime where the victims feel ashamed. I actually felt guilty for suspecting you. Can you believe that? I apologize to myself for doubting you both. He turned back to face them. But now I want you to feel what I felt. Every moment of doubt, every sleepless night, every second of wondering if you're crazy for suspecting the people you trust most in the world. David held up his phone one more time, but instead of playing the video, he did something that made both Sarah and Marcus gasp. His thumb moved deliberately across the screen as he began to type. What are you doing? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. David's eyes never left the screen. Sending emails, one to our entire friend group, one to both our families, one to your workplace, Sarah, since you've been logging so many false overtime hours for your dates. And one to your firm, Marcus. I'm sure they'd love to know why their star employee has been missing so many client meetings. You can't, Marcus stepped forward, reaching for the phone. David, this will ruin us. Funny, David replied, stepping back. That's exactly what you've done to me. The difference is, I'm being honest about it. The storm outside reached a crescendo, as if nature itself was waiting to see what would happen next. In the beach house, 3 people stood frozen in a tableau of betrayal and consequence, each waiting to see if David would push the button that would destroy not just relationships, but entire lives. Please, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. Don't do this. David's thumb remained poised over his phone screen, the emails ready to send. Years of shared history, countless intertwined relationships, and multiple careers hung in the balance of that single touch. Why shouldn't I? He asked softly. Give me one reason why I should protect the people who didn't protect me. Marcus took a tentative step forward. Because you're better than us. Because you've always been the better person. That's why this is killing us. We betrayed someone who never would have done this to us. Don't, David's voice sharpened. Don't try to manipulate me with compliments. Not now. Sarah sank back onto the couch, her face in her hands. We'll leave, both of us. You'll never have to see us again. Just, please don't destroy everything. Everything? David laughed, a hollow sound. You mean like how you destroyed everything for me? My relationship, my best friendship, my trust in people, that kind of everything? Lightning flashed again, illuminating the tears on Marcus's face. What do you want from us, David? What can we do? I want... David's voice caught in his throat. I want the last 3 months back. I want to unsee what I saw on the beach tonight. I want to unlearn what it feels like to be betrayed by the 2 people I trusted most in the world. He looked down at his phone, at the emails waiting to be sent. One touch and their lives would implode. Careers damaged, families fractured, reputations ruined. It would be so easy, so satisfying, so permanent. You know what the worst part is? David continued, his voice barely a whisper. I actually thought we'd grow old together. All those jokes about being in a retirement home, playing chess and complaining about our arthritis. I believed them. I saw that future so clearly. Sarah sobbed harder, the sound mixing with the howling wind outside. Marcus looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour, his face drawn and pale. David, Marcus started. Stop talking, David cut him off. Just stop. I need to think. The storm raged on outside as David paced the room, his wet shoes leaving footprints on the hardwood floor. Each step was a memory. Game nights in this very room, beach bonfires visible through those windows, lazy Sunday mornings in the kitchen. All tainted now, all twisted by betrayal. His phone felt heavy in his hand, the weight of destruction at his fingertips. One touch to punish them. One touch to make them feel a fraction of the pain they'd caused him. One touch to ensure they'd never forget what they'd done. But as David looked at their broken faces, at the fear and guilt etched into every line, he realized something that made his heart ache even more. Revenge wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't heal his pain. It wouldn't restore his trust. It would just create more wreckage in a storm that had already destroyed too much. His thumb moved over the phone screen, and both Sarah and Marcus held their breath. The room was silent except for the rain hammering against the windows and the occasional rumble of thunder. Whatever David decided in this moment would define not just their futures, but who he was as a person. The tension built as David stared at his phone, the power to destroy lives literally at his fingertips. Sometimes the hardest choices aren't between right and wrong, but between vengeance and grace, between destruction and mercy. In the darkness of the beach house, surrounded by the ghosts of happier times, David prepared to make his final decision, one that would either bring this story to a devastating end or open the door to something else entirely. David's thumb moved decisively across the screen. The sound of multiple emails deleting filled the tense silence. I'm not going to send them, he said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Not because you deserve mercy, but because I refuse to let your betrayal turn me into someone I'm not. Sarah's shoulders sagged with relief, while Marcus let out a shaky breath. But understand this, David continued, his eyes hard as steel. My silence comes with conditions. He turned to Sarah first. You'll resign from your position tomorrow. No 2 weeks' notice, no explanation, just leave. I know the startup in Seattle has been trying to recruit you for months. Accept their offer. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. Okay, she whispered. And you, David turned to Marcus, will request a transfer to your firm's London office, the one you've been avoiding because it's too far from home. Distance is exactly what you need right now. Marcus swallowed hard, but nodded. I'll make the call in the morning. I don't care what you tell people about why you're leaving. Make up whatever stories you want. But you'll both be gone within the week, and you'll stay gone. David's voice was eerily calm now. If I ever see either of you again, if I hear you're still in contact with each other, those emails won't stay deleted. What about our friends, our families? Sarah asked softly. They're not your concern anymore. You lost the right to worry about those relationships the moment you decided to betray them all. David walked to the window, watching the storm gradually begin to subside. "I'll handle the fallout. I'll be the one to explain your sudden departures. I'll be the one to comfort your parents when they don't understand why their children abandoned their lives. I'll be the one to hold everything together, like I always have." Thunder rumbled in the distance, softer now, like nature itself was beginning to tire of this drama. "You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave this house," David said, his back still turned to them. "Take only what you brought for the weekend. Everything else, the photos, the memories, the shared possessions, leave them. They don't belong to you anymore." He heard them move quietly through the house, gathering their belongings. No one spoke. The only sounds were the diminishing storm and the soft thuds of bags being packed. 53 minutes later, 2 car doors slammed in succession. David didn't turn to watch them leave. He didn't need to see their final departure. Instead, he watched their headlights sweep across the beach through the window, illuminating the spot where he'd witnessed their betrayal just hours before. As the sound of their cars faded into the night, David finally allowed his shoulders to slump. He pulled out his phone one last time, not to send emails, but to look at the video he'd recorded. His thumb hovered over it for a long moment before pressing delete. Some evidence doesn't need to be preserved. Some wounds don't need to be reopened. Some stories are better left in the past, where they belong. The storm had passed now, leaving behind a clean, rain-washed world. David stepped out onto the deck, breathing in the salty air. The moon was emerging from behind the clouds, casting a silver path across the dark water. He thought about the choice he'd just made, choosing mercy over vengeance, growth over destruction. It wasn't forgiveness. He wasn't ready for that, might never be ready for that. But it was something else, something that felt like the first step toward healing. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't in destroying those who hurt you, but in refusing to let their betrayal destroy who you are. David sat on the deck steps, watching the waves roll in under the clearing sky. In the distance, a ship's light blinked steadily, reminding him that even in the darkest nights, there are always points of light to guide the way home. Not the home he'd thought he had, that was gone forever, but perhaps towards something new, something stronger, built on the foundation of who he chose to be in his darkest moment. The night stretched out before him, full of possibility and uncertainty. But for the first time since this nightmare began, David felt like he could breathe again. Sometimes, he realized, the most powerful thing you can do is not what you're capable of doing, but what you choose not to do. As the first light of dawn began to paint the horizon, David Chen sat alone on the beach house steps, saying goodbye to the life he'd known and hello to whatever came next. The story of betrayal was over, but his story, the story of resilience, of choosing light over darkness, was just beginning. And in that quiet moment between night and day, he understood something his mother had told him long ago. The truth will always rise to the surface, like oil in water. But what you do with that truth, that's what defines you. David had chosen, and somehow, in choosing mercy over vengeance, he felt not weaker, but stronger, not defeated, but renewed. Because sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying others, but from refusing to let them destroy the best parts of yourself.